Okay, welcome back. Third lesson of today, third lesson of XAML. And the topic of this third lesson will be a little bit more advanced than the one in the first two sessions. We'll talk about details of styling, a little bit about data binding. Data binding will be a deep dive next week. And we will take a little bit of a look at how to implement forms. Forms are important because we are going to build some database-oriented applications. We'll see how that works. First, before we go into any further details, students at home, students here, do we have any open questions? Did I not describe something well enough? Any open ends, loose ends that we have to gather? Fine, good. I think it wasn't that difficult until now. It is maybe new, a lot of new things, you have to practice it, but it wasn't so difficult. So, let's talk about styling. So far, we only styled things here in XAML by styling all items of a text block, for instance. Now our card, let me show you the app again so you can remember how it looked like. Here we have our robots. This is what I call a card, okay? So you see it contains an image, a header item, and here a regular text item here at the bottom. And we want to style this guy here. So in this case, we have two different text blocks and they should have two different kinds of styling. And this can be done by applying the style attribute here on the text block or on the item. This style attribute is very similar to what you know from HTML classes. In HTML, you define classes. And in WPF or XAML, you define styles. And if you would like to refer to a specific style, you put the style, we had that before, in the window resources or grid resources or in app XAML. And instead of giving them a class name, like in HTML, you give these things a key. This key here, header, is then used down here to refer to the styles that we have up. So the style is referring to a static resource. This is why it is called resources up there. And this is the key inside the static resources. Now the beauty is that we get a lot of nice IntelliSense here. So if you type style, enter, curly braces, static, enter, and if you just type a blank and you have the key already, you just need to select it, enter, done. You see, it's really, really productive and easy to enter. You can't make any typos if you do it correctly, everything is fine. If you do that correctly, you refer up to this style. And this style isn't very difficult. It refers to a text block. It has a key, and in our case, it changes the font size. It makes the text center aligned, and it has some margins. Now the margins are a little bit interesting. If we take a look, it contains 4 elements. Margins are used very frequently, and it is in the following order: left, up, right, down. Okay, you can look it up in the documentation. So 0 is the left margin, 5 is the top margin, 0 is the right margin, and 10 is the bottom margin. Not down, sorry, it should say bottom. Got it? Left, up, right, bottom. Good. Now the second one, this is the normal text block. See here on the right hand side. This is the normal text block, nothing special here. And last but not least, I did a little bit of styling on the border. See the border here? References the key card. This is how it relates to each other. Let's take a look at the different properties that are set here. The thickness of the border. I think you get it from the context what that means. The border brush, the border background. This is the background of the card. Now this is kind of interesting, corner radius. This corner radius leads to leads to, come on, come up, come up, and this one. Okay, this is the corner radius. Padding and margin. What is the difference between padding and margin? It's the same as in HTML. Yes, do you have an idea?
Margin is what is padding is for sort of the space between everything that's its child.
Yes.
And margin is everything that's sort of all the same.
It's kind of outside. So if I run this guy, you're right. Yes, one is inside and the other is outside. So if I demonstrate that here, the whole card would be something like this. Okay? So outside, this one, outside, this is the margin. And here, this spacing here between the border and the text, this would be the padding. Okay? So margin is, in this case, outside of the card, and padding is the distance inside of the card. Distance to its children. Exactly what you said. Good? So this is margin and padding. It's very similar to what you know from HTML. So not very difficult. Good. Again, if you want to have this styling for all the windows that you have, you would take all these styles and move them here to XAML, just copy and paste them, and then they apply to everything. Got it? So this thing is important. You will see in XAML very frequently these curly braces. These curly braces, they mark something which is called a markup extension. Because it's not really XML. XML doesn't know about the curly braces. So therefore it is called a markup extension. There is a static resource markup extension. And if you hear me talking about the markup extension, then you have to think, I need the curly braces. Good? Questions? No questions? I hope that means that I described it properly. One thing I forgot because it's important. See that one? This is cute. Text wrapping wrap. This is really nice because with text wrapping, you can make sure that the text nicely wraps into the next line. You see that one? You can also do other great things here. If I, for instance, copy this sentence and I paste it in a few times, now you see here the text is too long, or it gets longer and longer, and so the size of the card automatically extends. So now the size of the card is larger because the text has increased. If I scroll down, the next cards are smaller again. See that one? But up here, they are larger. If I change the size of the card to a fixed size, where is the border here? Let's add, you don't need to follow along, just follow along in your mind. Set the properties, let's say height, and make it a fixed height. I have to experiment a little bit. Let's say 350. Let's see how that looks like. Yes, 350 is okay. See? Now it's too long, but it still is a nice breaking. But if we go here, whoa, I mistyped something. Save it. Really? I just wanted to impress you, but I think it didn't turn out well. No, it didn't. Okay, I would have to think about normally with overflow should print 3 dots when it gets too long. But I currently don't know why it doesn't do it here. Let me quickly think. I can't come up with an idea. Sorry, would have been a nice demo if it would have worked, but it didn't, so I'm sorry. I think you get the idea. So text wrapping is really useful when you have just text. Good. Let's complete this one. We learned about window resources, so let's again delete everything from the window and let's concentrate on the last example that we have on this day. In this case, I would like, together with you, build a nice little form, an input form, okay? And again, it doesn't make sense to type everything in because it's not that interesting. Before we copy the code, let me quickly introduce you to some controls which might turn out useful for your upcoming homeworks, exams, or your final year projects or whatever, okay? So let's type in only a little bit of code. Let's use a stack panel. And inside of the stack panel, let's use a date picker. This one. I will go here. And here you see this is a date picker. If you click on it, you will see a nice little date picker. You can select it and you get a date. So this is the date picker control. Of course, it has a lot of properties where you can make sure that the date picker looks exactly like you want it to look. And I hope that's fine. So this is the date picker. The next thing that I would like to show you is, of course, the combo box. Inside the combo box, you can add combo box items if you want. Combo box items, something like this. Dot, dot, dot. And you see, you can select something. Not very complicated, but now comes the important thing. It looks so simple. But if we take a look at the combo box item here, this is a kind of advanced thing, but it's really nice and it shows the power of XAML. It really impressively, I think. If you take a look at the combo box item class and you go to properties and you scroll down a little bit, then you will find the content property. This is where the content goes in, okay? And if we take a look at the content, you see the type of the content. See it? That is not text. What does that mean? We can put in whatever we want. So that means we cannot only put in here some text, but what we could do is we could say image source https robo hash dot, I forgot it. I have to copy it. Let's take this one. Robo hash and maybe make it height equal 35, something like this. And if we do that and we take a look at our beautiful WPF app, we suddenly have an icon inside of our combo box. Guess what? You could add a stack panel inside of a combo box. You could add a grid inside of a combo box. You could add whatever you want. So you can build very easily impressive combo boxes, list boxes, and things like that by just using all the things that I showed you before. This is a huge difference to HTML. In HTML, you only have very basic combo boxes. And if you want to have a fancy combo box or a fancy list box, you, in practice, typically have to buy or use some open source third-party controls. In WPF, that's a piece of cake because it's just an object, so you can put in whatever you want. Understood? You could even add interactive controls. You could add a button. Click me with maybe a little bit of margin, let's say 5, something like this. You can add a button inside of a combo box and it is still clickable. You can click on this button and you can handle it in C#. Don't ask me what you could do that for, but it's possible. Think of a list box. There it makes sense. Got it? So you get a lot of freedom. And now you understand why the XAML is really pretty powerful for building apps. That was the combo box. And last but not least, I would like to introduce you to the slider. Also something which is very commonly used. Of course, things like checkbox and so on, I think they are obvious. They are kind of obvious, I would say. And here you see, this is a slider. This slider has a value, and it can also you can also show ticks where the user gets an idea what you can do with it. This slider could, for instance, be used for some, I don't know, some visualization, size of a graphic, or maybe the shoe size of the customer, or whatever a slider could be. Understood? 3 nice things what you can do here inside of XAML. Got it? Good. And of course, just because it's so beautiful, you can add the slider to the combo box. And then again, strange things happen, but it still works. If you open the combo box, you suddenly have a slider. Unfortunately, it has no width, so currently you can't do anything useful with it. You have to set a width, but then you have a working slider inside of a combo box. Good. You know what? For the sake of completeness, we will do a checkbox also. So if you want to have a checkbox, it works perfectly fine. Just so you have seen it, here you have now a checkbox. Good. Good. Now let's delete the whole stack panel. Let's go to our website. I got you the link, but please scroll down. We are now in the area of the form. See that one? Form. Please look for 070 form on the link that I gave you in Discord. And copy everything from window resources down to the end of the grid. Paste it in. And run the app so that we can see what this app is all about. Oh, there is a click on save inside the code. Please remove it for now. We will add it in a second. Then it should compile and run. Let me know if you have any problems getting it to run. Nice. So as you can see, this is a kind of input form. I can type in my first name, I can type in my last name, I can easily select date. The date is properly formatted. I can change the size, my size, and here you see the size directly written as text on the right hand side, and I have a nice little button, a save button. So that would be a typical form. First question to you, what do you think? Which panel did I use to implement this form? Stack panel, doc panel, rep panel, or grid? Yeah, exactly. I used the grid to implement this form, and this grid consists of, here, 1 column, 2 columns, 1 row, 2nd row, and so on. I think you got the idea. But how did I implement this? Yeah.
Maybe stack panel was horizontally.
It could be a stack panel, or it could be a grid inside a grid. Because this is again a grid which has one column and a second column, or maybe even 3 columns if we want to display the centimeters in a different cell. So yes, you're right, you could do it with a nested stack panel, or you could do it with a grid. So this is a kind of thinking, if you would implement things with XAML, that you have to get used to. How do I combine all these panels to lay out the controls on the screen properly? The important thing is if I change this one, you see, it still works. And this is only possible if you really use panels instead of absolute positioning. Think of an app on a phone, for instance. If you have it in portrait or if you have it in landscape, it should still look nice. And this is why you should use panels instead of absolute positioning. Good? Good. So let's take a look at the implementation of this form. It's not very complicated. It just uses things that you already know. Well, 1 or 2 tricks which we didn't cover yet. First thing, we already discussed it, the entire layout is a grid. We have 2 columns, I already showed you that, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. That should be easy, right? Good. The next one is more interesting. This is kind of WPF specific. This doesn't work like this in Xamarin Forms or UWP. WPF has a control which is called a label. This label enables you to write an underscore in front of a letter of the label, and then you can define a target with new thing, markup extension binding, and this will be your friend. You better make friend with this binding markup extension because we will use it all over the place, continuously. Maybe not today, but next week we'll dive into data binding, and this will be your friend when it comes to data binding. It's just like in Angular, the double curly braces, or NG form, you know, the banana in a box binding, the square brackets, the round brackets, and things like that. This is the same thing here in Xamarin. This is not in Xamarin, in XAML. This is data binding. And in this case, I am binding the label to the text box. Box means the user can enter something. What is the result of this target binding if I run this app here? If I, let me zoom in a little bit, if I press the Alt key, do you see when I press the Alt key, F gets an underscore? See that one? And if I press Alt F, the cursor is inside the text box, which is linked as a target to the label. Very useful in Windows applications. So if a user wants to use just the keyboard, not the mouse, you can do that with labels. It's not super important, but it's kind of useful in Windows. Good. Binding, element name, name. That should be kind of obvious because it's right beneath each other. Same is true for the last name, nothing special here, a little bit of grids, nothing special here. Now here, we make use of the date picker. See that one? Again, nothing special here. And now comes the interesting part. The interesting part is this one. This is the slider, see? The slider contains a label, just like the others too, but now we have a grid inside of the grid. This is the nested grid that I talked about a second ago. And inside of the grid, we say, make the slider as large as possible, and then we make 2 column definitions. One has a minimum width of 25, the other is just auto. The first one, this text will contain the value of the slider, and this text will just contain the text centimeter. And how do I link the value of the slider with the text block? Please take a look at that one. I'm doing again let me repeat that for you, markup, come on, extension binding. The markup extension binding references this element name slider and extracts here the value from the slider. And with that, the value of the slider is continuously automatically refreshed. We don't have to do anything. Got it? I don't need to write code for that. Do I still have it running? No, I don't have it running anymore, so let's run it again. Just to remind you what it does. Scroll and you see here the value is continuously updated. Got it? Again, binding. Let's step a little bit back and talk about what we see here. Think about HTML, web development. Does HTML have data binding built in? No. You need a framework for that. You need a framework like Angular, React, Vue, or any other framework that you have. This is an application framework, XAML. So XAML has the basic concepts for data binding built in because it's so important for writing applications. HTML, its roots are not in application development. It's in document writing. That is the root of HTML, and therefore HTML doesn't have data binding. I hope you see now more and more and more the differences between these two markup languages. So remember this one, binding, element name, and path. And this is what we are going to talk a lot next week. Next week will be data binding, data binding, data binding, data binding, because once we have XAML and data binding, we can start building interesting apps. Yeah, these are the two building blocks that we need in order to do something meaningful with WPF. Yeah, well, finally we have down here the button. Nothing special. Good. This is default will lead to pressing enter, activating the button. Now, last demo of today. Please add a click handler to the button on save. If you do that, and if I try to run that guy, I will get an error because, as you can see here, on save doesn't exist. If you want to have a smoother ride, let me show you an editor trick in Visual Studio. I'm not sure if it works in Rider equally. I can say click and see, I select new event handler and just press enter. And then here I can press F12, go to definition, and this will bring me immediately into my C# code directly to the button handler. See it? I can go to button click here, press Ctrl RR for rename and say on save, enter. And if I do that, I will automatically get a renamed click handler directly here in my XAML. So make your life easier by really using the features that Visual Studio gives you. Does it work similarly in Rider?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does? Good. Nice. Yeah, the menu click is no longer necessary here. So in on save, just to prove the point, I would like to output a message like, I don't know, first name, last name, is born on birthday, and is so and so many centimeters tall. Okay? So let's do that. Message box dot show. The question is, how can we access the value that the user has inputted into our text box? Who can remember how we do that? This is our text box. How can we access the value of the text box in C#?
First name, text.
Exactly, not text but value. But yes. So if we say here, first name, why do we have first name? Because we gave it a name. Can you remember we had that an hour ago? Dot value, no text. You were right, I were wrong. Text, sorry. First name, last name, text. Was born on, I think I called it birthday. Did you know that in C# with these template strings you can apply formatting just by adding a colon, day, month, year. Did you know that? Very useful. That's just the text formatting. And is, how did I call that one? Slider. Where is the slider? Size. Size. Here it is called value. This is what I had in mind. Centimeters tall. Got the idea? With the name elements, we can access them. And we can easily do whatever we want in C#. So if you run this guy here, and if I enter something, foo, bar, select any kind of date, something like this, change the size a little bit, click on save, then you see, oh, the formatting didn't work. Why? Ah, I know why it didn't work. Sorry. I have to fix that one. Of course, we need to go to selected date, I think is the name. Sorry. Birthday dot selected date. I'm sorry. I forgot that one. Let's rerun it. Foo, bar, select the date, something like this. Change it a little bit, press enter, and now it looks nice. See? Foobar was born on 6th of May and it's 140 centimeters tall. Got it? Difficult? No. That's the whole point. Shouldn't be difficult. Shouldn't be hard. Of course, there are a lot more tricks to that. And beautiful, professional XAML and WPF code looks very much differently. It's always the same. But simple things have to be simple and complex things have to be possible. And that is exactly how WPF and XAML works here. Good. Before we go on into the last demo, we have time for one more demo. Any questions regarding that? You have a link to this example in your material. So when it comes to next week, you will get your first homework for WPF. And you can take a look at all the sample that I gave you, okay? So of course, our goal is to use a WPF UI that accesses a web API that is written in ASP.NET Core that stores data using Entity Framework in a database. But don't worry, you will not have to implement another web API. I will give you ready-made web APIs, and your job will be to implement the UI for that. Because web APIs, for now, we are done with that. Good? Good. Last sample that I prepared for you. Let's delete everything from the window and also the C# code here. And I would like to introduce you to a final control which you haven't seen yet. Let's type it in first and then copy in a more complex example. Well, maybe, let me see. Oh, I think it's so simple. Yeah, maybe we'll add it. We will see. Please use the tab control. Inside the tab control, please use a tab item. And inside of the tab item, put a text block. with text equals hello world, you know the drill, with a little bit of margin, with a font size a little bit blown up. Okay, oops. If you run this, you will get a so-called tab control. See that one? Which is not very fancy yet. I will keep it running. So what we can now do is we can maybe copy this tab item 2-3 times, and it will give us already a tab control. Still, not very fancy, because we have to add a header. This is what in WPF and XAML is called a headed control, because it has a header. Let's say item 1, and here we say header item 2, and here we say header, header item 3. If you do that one, woohoo, we now have a meaningful tab control. Is that possible in HTML? Of course not, because HTML was never built for apps. There is no tab control. Of course there is a tab control. You can buy or get open source tab controls, but they are built on CSS and JavaScript and a lot of things. HTML itself, it doesn't have a tab control. So far so good, right? That wouldn't be that interesting, but maybe it was interesting for you to see that there is a tab control. Okay, but what is this header all about? Let's explore the tab item a little bit by taking a look at the tab item here in the documentation. I am particularly interested in the header. Let's scroll down to the header. What is the type of the header? Do you get the idea? It's not a text, it's object. So what could we do? We can add anything, whatever we want. So what we can do is we can add an image here, but how? I mean, I cannot write image here. If I do that one, it doesn't make any sense. You get the idea? Because that is a string. How can I specify an object, a complex thing, inside of an XML attribute? It doesn't work. Do you get the idea? This is why XAML comes up with something which is very important, with the so-called content element syntax. Please try to follow along. Delete the header here, delete it, and use an XML element. Listen closely. Use an XML element to define a property value. That's a kind of contradiction. Either you have an element or you have a property. And XAML solves that. Tab item dot header. So now we are saying, XAML, hey, this should become a property value, but I have to write it as an element because I would like to specify something more complex than just a string value. Now I can use an image. Source equals to, let me see, I haven't turned clipboard history on. I'm sorry, I have to go back to my RoboHash stuff here. Here is my RoboHash stuff, maybe with a fixed height of, I don't know, 50, something like this. And if I do it like that, I now have here my beautiful cat inside of the header. The cat is not the point. The point from XAML is this one. Write a property as an element. And here you really see the nature of XAML. It has been built for such purposes. Huge difference to HTML. You get the idea? Of course, you could combine it with a grid. You can put a grid inside of a header. And this is exactly what I did in the last example. So finally for today, please go to my example that I gave you, where was it? It was here. It's a little bit up above here. It says tab control, see it? And copy everything from the window resources to the end of the tab control. I want to spare you the typing. I did that for you yesterday. And if you do that, you now have hopefully a beautiful WPF application. See that one? Where you can now switch between the robots. They are still cars, but now you have a tab control up here. And the tab control consists of the image of the avatar of the robot and the robot's name. And how did I do that? By using, you see it here, a stack panel with the image and the text block, and I used it inside of the header. And with that I have a nicely formatted header. Get it? And the rest is just the card that we had before. Nothing special here. And then I just copied it. And put it here so you can see it. Header, header, image, and text block. Good. This is what I wanted to show you as a kind of introduction to XAML. It's even more important for me that you understand the differences between two different user interface technologies. You told me that you're interested in a more broader knowledge about how different technologies relate to each other and are different from each other. If you just do web development, if you just learn about HTML, if you just take a look at React or something like this, this would be a too narrow view. We need to understand how different approaches work, and then we understand which user interface technology suits which needs. Okay? And now you got your first impression about XAML, and the differences to WinForms should be obvious, and the differences to HTML should now be very, very clear. Do we have any questions currently? How do you like what you have seen? Does that look interesting? Does that look convincing? Do you think it is fun building a UI with something like this? What are your thoughts about it? Yes, please.
It's better than any UI builder I've ever used before.
Okay.
Even better than the iOS UI builder, I think.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that, but that's nice. So you kind of like it, right? There are a lot of drawbacks too, but the basic principle is convincing. I agree with that. Yeah.
It combines the best of all worlds.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
I think it's I like it more than just to sort of default HTML and CSS and JavaScript, but I prefer the sort of Flutter because it combines both the sort of XAML thing and but you're actually just writing objects.
Yeah.
I like it much more.
Yeah. I fully understand what you mean, and we will definitely take a look at Flutter. So Flutter will come, and Flutter has a completely different approach. It's a very modern approach, and there are also mixed approaches. Have you anybody used React before? Yeah, JSX. It's a kind of mixed world, right? You have the HTML and the TypeScript mingled into each other. And again, kind of best of both worlds, you told me. Yeah, exactly. Any other comments? I'm also happy to take comments from students at home, if you are still here. Good. Nice. Good. So, the XAML part is online. Let me show you that. It's here. If you go to the slides, you will see the slides, hopefully, and at the end you will see the XAML introduction. And if you want to take a look at the examples, here you see the examples. See, just follow this link and it will bring you exactly to these code snippets. So you have all the things that we did in your material. Good. With that, I would like to close today's lesson. Again, take a look at Global Azure. If you are bored tomorrow in the afternoon, there are lots of interesting sessions. You are invited to take a look, participate. We have a Discord server. You can ask questions, whatever. I think we have a really nice program. It's 100% community. It's not financially driven. It's just because we are a bunch of people who like to code. So we would be very happy if you find something that is interesting, then just come around and ask questions. By the way, we started a coding contest too. So if you would like to participate, you can win exciting prizes, I think. And it's a question of honor, whether it is possible that you play with the big guys. It will not be simple to beat these players that we already have here from the community. But if you like doing coding, the coding contest is yours. It has nothing to do with school, yes? It's just a private issue. Good. So with that, let's close today's lesson.